By the 1st of October, Christmas is pretty much underway. And we always seem to be in a hurry to get Christmas started. If you watch Hallmark movies, you know exactly what I mean. We are in such a hurry to get to Christmas, but we should not be in a hurry to leave Christmas. A lot of people take down their Christmas trees the day after Christmas and act as if Christmas never happened. I mean, all their Christmas decorations, everything is put up the day after Christmas. The gospel lesson for this day gives us an understanding, an interesting aspect of the Christmas story. 8 days after Jesus is born, he is taken to the temple to be dedicated to God, as is laid out in the 12th chapter of Leviticus. Jesus is recognized as God's agent of salvation. Something very special happens when Jesus is brought to the temple. There at the temple is Simeon, a righteous and devout man who is filled with the Holy Spirit. When Mary and Joseph placed Jesus into Simeon's arms, he says, "With my own eyes, I've seen your salvation. It's now out in the open for everyone to see. A God revealing light to the non-Jewish nations and of glory for your people Israel." This baby, Jesus, would bring the light of God into the world. Joseph and Mary are dumbfounded. They don't know what to say. It's interesting that Simeon went on to bless them and then says to Mary, his mother, "This child marks both the failure and the recovery of many in Israel. A figure misunderstood and contradicted. The pain of the sword thrust through you, Mary. But the rejection will force honesty as God reveals who they really are." Franciscan priest Richard Rohr, and many of you probably read him or know about him, but Richard Rohr talks about the true self and the false self. The true self is who we really are with God's help. The false self is who we often pretend to be. But hear what Simeon is saying. The rejection of Jesus as the Son of God will force honesty as God reveals who we really are. It's true that often we don't want to reveal who we really are. The story of John Newton, who wrote what is considered the greatest hymn of the faith, Amazing Grace, it tells how Newton acknowledges the truth about himself that most of us can identify with. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. John Newton had been the captain of a slave ship and then became a priest in the Church of England. Now that's going from one extreme to the other for sure. But when John Newton experienced the amazing grace of God, he had to face the truth about himself. Knowing Jesus causes us to look at who we really are. It forces honesty, as Simeon said. It forces honesty. And that is not always easy. One of the questions we ask at Christmas is, what did you get? In fact, I will ask my 4 grandchildren, what did Santa Claus bring you? But the most important question at Christmas is, what did you give? What did you give? One of the best hymns for this day is In the Bleak Midwinter, number 221 in the hymnal. The last line gives us focus on what Christmas means. What can I give him, poor as I am? If I were a shepherd, I would bring a lamb. If I were a wise man, I would do my part. Yet what I can, I give him. Give my heart. That's the invitation of Christmas. Will we give Jesus our hearts? And then I wrote down a few notes for Epiphany, because we really need to keep this connection going on. We really do. And the gospel lesson for Epiphany Sunday is Matthew 2, 1 through 12. Epiphany, you know, is the story of the wise men, or as Eugene Peterson says in the message, scholars from the East. One of the realities of this part of the story of Jesus' birth is that people have always been looking for Jesus, for the Messiah. The people of Israel have always been looking. When Herod heard that the scholars were in Jerusalem and were asking questions about the newborn king of the Jews, Herod is terrified, and most of Jerusalem as well. Herod gathers the high priests and religion scholars and asks them, "Where is the Messiah to be born?" And they respond. The prophet Micah wrote it plainly, Bethlehem in the land of Judah. From you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel. It's interesting that Herod arranges a secret meeting with the scholars from the East. He pretends to be devout in his belief of the coming Messiah and tells them, "When you find Jesus, let me know, and I will join you at once in worship." Now he's pretending to that this is really important to him. We pretend a lot. The wise men were instructed by Herod, set off for Bethlehem. And the star appeared again, and it led them to the place where the child was. They could hardly contain themselves. They were in the right place at the right time. They entered the house and saw the child in the arms of Mary, his mother. Overcome with joy, they kneeled and worshiped him and presented gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. In a dream, you remember, they are warned not to report back to Herod. So they left the territory without being seen and returned to their own country. After the scholars were gone, God's angel showed up again in Joseph's dream and commanded, "Get up, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt." It intrigues me that the story of the wise men is not found in Luke's nativity narrative. In fact, Luke's account says that 8 days after Jesus' birth, he is taken to the temple to be dedicated, and then they return to Nazareth. And the next scene that Luke describes is when Jesus is 12 years old and is taken to the temple. It's important to remember that in order to know Jesus, we have to be looking for him. The wise men saw this star and believed it was a sign from God. And they packed up and went out to find the Messiah. People are always looking for something to bring meaning to their lives. And the reality is that Jesus is the one who brings meaning into our world and to our lives. But Jesus is not without threat in our world as he was in the world into which he was born. The threat that Jesus brought to Herod was that his cruel and ruthless rule was not the way life should be. Across the world, we see people being subjected to cruelty and abuse. We can't help but to remember our family in South Sudan who have been forced to live in a refugee camp in Uganda. Why? Because of cruel and ruthless leaders who are only interested in staying in power and care nothing about the needs, hopes, and dreams of their people. It is important to remember that because of the treasure that was brought to the wise by the wise men, Joseph had the resources to take his wife and child to Egypt, so that Jesus was not one of the babies killed by Herod. Our willingness to share our resources and ourselves so that the ministry of Jesus can be fulfilled in the world was the calling of the wise men, and it is our calling today. God is calling us to be wise people as we seek to navigate this journey of life. Most of the struggles that we experience in life come during those times when we fail to have a wise heart. Most of the failures I have experienced in my life and witnessed in the life of others has been because of a lack of wisdom. As Mr. Rogers reminds us, in times of trouble, we are certainly living in times of trouble, just as it was in Bethlehem 2,000 years ago. Mr. Rogers says, look for the helpers. The wise men were helpers. And I wonder about some of the helpers that we've experienced in our lives. I know all of us, we wouldn't be here today if it weren't for helpers that we have had in our lives. And I think that's something we could talk about. To be helpers, that's what we're called to be, just like these wise men who were some of the heroes at the time of Jesus' birth.